No pasa nada.
Sí.
Bueno, bienvenidos a todos y a todas. Espero que estén pasando bien, se hayan preparado para este rato, porque van a absorber un montón de información. Em, Como sabrán, la charla va a estar dada en inglés. Nosotros vamos a tratar de vamos a hacer el mejor intento de nuestras vidas para hacer la traducción. No les prometemos nada, así que si alguno escucha directamente inglés, buenísimo, va a tener la información de primera mano. Así que antes de arrancar, hay algunos están festejando, otros están puteando, está bien, aceptamos todo, pero bueno, era parte del costo de poder acceder a la información de primera mano que vamos a recibir. Les quiero contar un poco, antes que nada, sobre Patrick, que es investigador en toda la parte de seguridad relacionada con macOS. Tiene un montón de cosas muy interesantes para compartir. Para empezar, vive en Hawái, así que nada, le pueden hacer preguntas relacionadas con eso, pero no es de las cosas que seguramente va a sumar más que en seguridad, pero bueno, le pueden preguntar sobre eso. Nos va a compartir cosas de su trabajo, de lo que estuvo haciendo en los últimos años en su carrera, de su trabajo en la NASA, la NSA, cómo armó y vendió su empresa de ciberseguridad, fundó una conferencia relacionada con seguridad en macOS, escribió un libro, hizo un montón de cosas y se fue dando cuenta qué es lo que le hubiera gustado saber cuando arrancó todo esto, que es un poco una retrospectiva que hacemos los que hace tiempo que venimos en este mundillo. Así que, dicho esto, vamos a arrancar. No sé, Andy, si me está faltando algo, ¿querés decir algo más? Bien.
Perfecto.
Perfect. So the floor is yours, Patrick.
Excellent. Okay, cool. Let's dive in. Me llamo Patricio y estoy feliz de hablar contigo hoy. So yeah, very excited to be speaking with you today. So as you mentioned, the presentation is going to be in English. I'll try to speak relatively slow. Sometimes I get a little carried away. So if I go too fast, let me know. So thank you for that very impressive introduction. I am flattered, humbled, very excited to be speaking with you all today. I want to thank Andrea for inviting me to speak. Also, thank you to Fede for organizing Hackademy. And also thank you for all of you for virtually attending this presentation today. I feel honored to be able to share some of my time with you. So the idea for today is I really want to talk a little bit about my journey in the cybersecurity field, kind of the path I took, some lessons learned, what worked for me, some of the pros and cons, just really kind of a learning experience. And then I want to spend a little bit of time talking about, what does a normal day in the life of Patrick will look like. And the idea is hopefully to show you one path, one route, to maybe inspire you, get you excited about cybersecurity, technology, but also talk about some of the amazing opportunities that are available, if you really buckle down and pursue a passionate career in cybersecurity, or really in any computer-related field. And I think by the end, we'll see, and I'm definitely biased, but I think this is the best career. Mentioned I'm able to live in Hawaii, do lots of fun things. And so, again, the hope is talking about some of the experiences I have to get to this spot can be applicable to your journeys and your path as well. So we're going to start kind of when I was a youngster, a niño. And, the one thing I always tell people is I actually did not grow up with computers or technology at all. We actually didn't have a television in my house. And so, as a kid, I was always really annoyed by that. I always wanted to go to my friends' houses, the ones that had television. So, we could watch cartoons and sports. But what we do is we'd spend our days really out and about playing in the woods, in nature. And the reason I mention this is because I found that a field in computer security, especially, is really based on a love of learning, and B, kind of this curiosity and creativity. And so I always tell people, like, if you didn't grow up with computers, if you didn't start programming at an early age, that's fine. That actually might be a benefit. Now, if you were lucky enough to grow up with computers and pick up programming language at an early age, I mean, that's great too. That's a really good skill to have. But it's really important not to feel that, hey, I wasn't, coding at age 5, and so, I'm not going to be successful in that field. That's really not the case at all. So I was really introduced to computers in high school. I had an older brother who really liked to play around and tinker with computers. And I remember that we went to kind of like a trade show for computers. And so at this trade show, you could buy all the different components to build your own computer. And this was a really exciting experience for me, and something that, grateful to my brother because he really understood a lot more of this. But what we did is we bought all the components for a computer and put it together. So again, a really learning hands-on experience. And I think we'll see this thread running throughout this talk, that again, having this mindset of wanting to figure out how things work, not worrying about getting your hands dirty. These are really all good skills that I think translate well. Come here. And I want you to Havana Espera. She is out chasing chickens. Okay. She makes sure the house is safe and that the roosters don't come in and steal my computers. Okay, so high school, yes, building computers, again, really kind of a great experience because cybersecurity, hacking, these kind of things, really I've noticed that people who succeed the best and make the best hackers, the best defenders, the best cybersecurity professionals are the ones that have this inquisitive mindset that want to know, how does a computer work? If I take this apart, can I put it back together? So any opportunities you have like that, definitely embrace those, because you really learn how things work, really kind of at their lowest level details. And also, anytime you're deconstructing things, putting it back together, that's really going to stimulate your brain in good ways that I think is very applicable to a path or a field in computer security. So after high school, I decided I wanted to go to university, to college. I knew I wanted to study computers. I really kind of liked the way computers work. They're very deterministic, right? They always kind of do the same thing every time. They're very logical. If you get mad at them, you can just turn them off. So many appealing qualities. Also, I really thought that it would be a career that would give me a lot of flexibility. And we'll talk more about this later, but ultimately we'll see that a field in computer security, computer science, programming gives you a lot of options for remote work, while also oftentimes getting paid a good salary. So again, this is really appealing when you're thinking about a career. So, in the United States, you have a lot of choices of universities. There are, state schools, which are often a lot cheaper. There's community college. And then we have the Ivy League schools. This is like MIT, Stanford, really the top tier universities. Unfortunately, I couldn't afford to go to these schools. In the United States, there's really not a lot of financial support for universities. So you're often, kind of paying out of your pocket, or your parents paying. And what a lot of people do is they take out large loans to attend these top tier universities. And, well, that might make sense for, if you're trying to be a lawyer, you probably you want to go to Harvard. If you're a business person, you might want to go to one of these top tier universities because you build a lot of connections. But one thing I've really noticed is, in terms of technology, it almost doesn't matter where you go to university. Obviously, if you have a full scholarship to MIT, go there. I mean, they have incredible instructors and incredible programs. So what I ended up doing, though, I went to a state university. I actually went to the University of Hawaii. I was like, I grew up, I was very cold. I don't like snow. And I was like, I'm going to pick my college destination based on La Clima, the weather, right? And, so I had never been to Hawaii before, jumped on a plane, and I enrolled as a computer science student. And I quickly learned that college was really about how much effort you wanted to put into it. High school, the teachers make sure you do your homework. But in the United States, once you're in college, you're kind of on your own. Like, no one's telling you have to get up early and go to class. No one's telling you, you have to do your homework. It's kind of sink or swim. So again, it kind of goes back to if you're really interested in a topic like computer security, programming, it doesn't almost matter what university you go to, because if you have this passionate love of learning, you're going to do well, and you're going to pick up on the foundational topics you need to succeed in a career in this. And I noticed this, and I think this is really true, because once I graduated and started working, some of my colleagues had gone to these very prestigious universities. And in terms of skill, we were definitely on par. We both had the same kind of basic understandings. So it wasn't necessarily they got a better, education than me. But the downside was, they had paid hundreds of thousands of dollars, and a lot of them were in large student loan debt. So I really always tell people and say, hey, especially in the field of technology, don't feel pressured to have to go to a very expensive school. As long as you have some passion and motivation, you're going to do great. So in university, I studied kind of all the basics, the computer science classes. I learned how to program, and I really also sought out, maybe the more niche or interesting classes. One of my favorite classes was on compilers. So I don't know if you covered this, but when you're building a program or an application, you write the source code and then you build it. And the compiler will translate it into machine code. So just as I'm giving this presentation in English and someone is translating it into Spanish for many of you, well, that's the same thing that a compiler does. Computers don't speak English. They basically speak binary ones and zeros. So when they take your source code, it needs to be translated so it can run natively. And so I took a class about compilers, and it was really interesting because in that class, you learn a ton about how computers work. You learn about binary code, assembly language, really the low-level details. And we'll see when you get into a field like cybersecurity and studying computer viruses and exploits, you really need to have that low-level understanding, because a lot of times malware and exploits are kind of operating at that lowest level because they want to take over the computer. And you need to kind of be at that level to, kind of have the most power. So, that was college, kind of got a good foundational, some good foundations, but I knew I wanted to do something a little more. And this is another thing that I always like to talk to people about is, while you're going through your education, look for external opportunities, whether those be internships, other jobs that align with your studies. I mean, and this applies to anything, right? If you're studying to be a lawyer, like see if you can get an internship at a law firm, or maybe you can work with a nonprofit, helping them with some legal stuff. In terms of computers, it turns out there's a good number of internships available, and this is such a good way to get your foot in the door. I can't talk enough about how valuable internships are. From your point of view, you get to apply some of the things that you've learned in a practical manner. So say you're really excited about programming and you've learned how to program in university, and then you go do an internship writing code. Well, one, you'll get a lot of experience, but two, you also might be like, maybe this isn't something I really want to do. Like, I like coding, but maybe not this specific type. Maybe I thought I wanted to be a game programmer, but doing an internship at a company that writes games, wow, it's really long hours and not a lot of pay, and I don't get to do all the creative stuff. So, very quickly you might find out that what you originally thought wasn't necessarily the ideal, but you haven't graduated yet. So maybe you can kind of pivot, take different computer programming classes, and really point yourself in a great direction. So it's kind of like, test driving a car before you buy that. So that's one really good benefit of internships. The other thing is, as I mentioned, right, you get a lot of practical hands-on experience. The company that's giving you the internship is also looking at you as a prospective employee. An internship is a really cheap way for them to basically test out if someone is going to be a good fit from their company. And if they're not, they can just say, okay, the internship's over, thank you, goodbye. They don't have to fire you and make it a big deal. But if you do a great job, they're going to be very happy to bring you on full time. So it's this really win-win scenario. And I saw that in multiple times where some of my classmates said, oh, I want to go to the beach. I don't really want to do this internship that only pays me $1 an hour. And I'm like, look, you have to look at it as an opportunity cost, so that, when it comes time to graduate, A, you'll know pretty much what exactly you want to do, but also B, you'll likely have job offers already lined up. And so that's something that's really powerful. And maybe this is something specific to the United States. I'm not sure how it is in Argentina, but the main takeaway is, while you're doing your studies, or if you're going through college, look for these external opportunities for you to, kind of have a hands-on experience. So I was lucky enough to land an internship with NASA. One of my professors had some connections at one of their research labs, and they were looking for interns to work on software for the space shuttles and the Martian rovers, the little guys that, drive around collecting rocks. And this was a really exciting time at NASA because they were just starting to embrace AI and autonomous self-driving vehicles. So when I started, the way the rovers worked is, if there was a rock that they wanted to examine, they would have to basically manually send the instructions for every step of the way. And that was painful because there's a big lag in communications, and you can only send communications at certain times because of, orbits and lack of direct communication links, et cetera, et cetera. So what they were trying to do is give the Martian rovers the smarts, the capabilities to basically be autonomous or self-driving. And again, this was, a long time ago. I'm not going to date myself too much, but this was before, self-driving Teslas, right? This was definitely a novelty. So we were working on some really interesting code for that, again, for the space shuttles and the Martian rovers. And that was a really cool experience because, I got to work with just some really incredible people. And so I'm very grateful for that. But I learned quickly that, working at NASA, while that was really cool, that wasn't for me. I wanted to do something even more exciting. I wanted to, get more involved in cybersecurity and hackers and computer viruses and cyber warfare, right? This is what really got me excited. So the National Security Agency, which is the United States' biggest spy agency, also has internships available for colleges. Basically, they're looking for young, bright-minded individuals to come do internships for them. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with the US government's intelligence agencies, but briefly, we have the FBI. The FBI are basically policemen at the national level, so they do law enforcement. We also have the CIA, who do spying with humans. They travel the world and do bad things. The NSA, on the other hand, does spying via digital means. So they're the ones that are trying to hack into foreign government satellites to intercept communications to figure out, what foreign governments, foreign militaries are planning, what their capabilities are. Also in the United States, we're very concerned about counterterrorism. So a lot of times the NSA will track terrorists and try again to figure out who they're talking to, if they're planning an attack. Again, doing this by essentially hacking into their devices, intercepting their communications, decrypting their communications, et cetera, et cetera. So the NSA had a really interesting internship program where you would come work at the NSA, and then you could work in different offices. So I can't go into all the details because, of course, it's all classified, but one of the first offices I worked in was studying computer viruses that had been used to target US government and military networks, the Pentagon, DoD systems. And the really cool thing about that, even though I was still a college student, I was exposed to, world-class exploits, malware. And, I was given these binaries and these exploits. And with a mentor, I was able to figure out, how they worked, how the hackers had got into the system, how our detections had missed them, et cetera, et cetera. So just an incredible opportunity that, again, was offered through an internship program. So that was a really incredible experience. I then switched to the other side of the National Security Agency, which is tasked with hacking other adversaries. Again, this is all classified work, but where else in the world, or one of the few places in the world, you can basically legally, hack into systems and write interesting capabilities. And so you just really learn a ton of very interesting things. So this was very eye-opening to me. And again, just a really neat opportunity that I am forever grateful for. So next up, I left with some friends. We started a cybersecurity company, which went really well. That was acquired. So then I went and worked for a bug bounty program in California. This time I had moved back to Hawaii. I was working remotely. One of the perks of working in cybersecurity in the tech space. And that was great because, again, one of the things that I always like to talk to students about is the importance of a work-life balance. I have a lot of friends that work, on DC, on the mainland. They make way more money than me, but they're working 10, 12 hours a day. And, eventually that catches up to you. And, when you get a little older, like myself, you really start realizing the value of, well, basically not working all the time. I mean, yes, you want to work, pay the bills, make sure you can live comfortably. But, I always talk to people like, don't feel like you have to do what everyone else is doing, right? And, if I'm being honest, it was tough to leave DC. I had a lot of good friends. Was kind of making a lot of money. And when I moved back to Hawaii, definitely, took a salary cut and had to say goodbye to a lot of friends. But it really took some time to prioritize, what was important to me. And especially in the field of cybersecurity, again, really having this creative mindset and not being burnt out or working all the time can give you a ton of upside and a ton of benefits. I mean, so many times, there's a problem I can't crack and I'm just banging my head on the desk. Then I'm like, okay, I'm going to go for a walk, go for a surf, go drink some mate on the beach. And while I'm doing that, I come back with fresh eyes. And a lot of times I can then, crack the problem really quickly. So again, really one of the lessons I've learned in, going through this field in cybersecurity is, don't feel like you always have to be working all the time. So most recently, I started another cybersecurity company with some friends, the ones that I worked with before, and we built a endpoint security product for Mac computers. And really, the reason I want to mention this is because this is something else I want to talk about and something that I think is really, really important. And something's worked well for me and I think might work well for others in this field. So I mentioned I did an internship at the NSA, and one of the options was we got to try out all these different offices. Each office had a different mission. One's like analyzing exploits, other ones are like hacking satellites, other ones are writing, antivirus software to protect DoD military systems. And me, I'm a young college kid. I want to know all of it. I'm like, I'm going to learn all of this. I'm going to be an expert. Yeah, no, there is no way humanly possible for you to be an expert in anything. So very quickly, I learned, and in retrospect, this is a very important thing to learn, is really you want to be an expert in one field. And it doesn't matter what that field is, make sure it's one that you're passionate about. But I've found a lot more success when you become an expert or very knowledgeable in one specific topic versus kind of knowing all of them. So very quickly, I said, okay, cryptography, that's too hard for me. It's too abstract. Like, I'm going to kind of punt on that. Same with writing websites and applications. I'm like, that's not really my thing. Yeah, there's money to be made. Not that interesting. I really wanted to focus on cybersecurity and ultimately not just all the topics. I want to focus specifically on Mac cybersecurity topics, which is really niche, right? I'm not even interested that much in iOS. And with that choice, with that decision, I've really been able to focus my time, my effort, my energy into studying Mac computers, Mac malware, Mac exploits, Apple security mechanisms, vulnerabilities in that, and really become, someone who is very knowledgeable in this field because yes, I've been doing it so long, but also because this is all I do. And there's a ton of benefits to that. In the introduction mentioned, some of the conference talks I do. A lot of times conferences want a talk on Apple security and macOS security. And if you're like the Mac security person, they're going to be like, hey, yeah, you should come give a talk. So that's something I really like to instill in students. Don't feel like you have to learn everything. I would say, dabble, try out web design, reverse engineering, programming, games, cryptography. Find what you're most passionate about, and then really try to clear the rest of it and say, this is what I'm going to focus on. Because I've seen people who do this, and myself as well, have a lot of success when you become kind of the expert in the field. But it takes some discipline because you have to say, hey, like your friend comes and says, hey, will you write an app for me? And this literally happened to me yesterday. And I'm like, sorry, I don't write apps anymore. I know how to write an app, and there's probably some money to be made there. But I was like, that would take away from me doing Mac security stuff, which I love to do. And again, being an expert in that space is really important. So that kind of brings me now to what a day in the life of Patrick, or a week or a month, let's say, because it changes all the time, looks like. And again, this is, when I'm at a spot that, after years of studying cybersecurity, I am now kind of, a Mac security expert. There's basically like 3 or 4 different things that I do, and it changes from day to day, which is great. Again, another thing about having a career in cybersecurity is that there's never a dull moment. There's always new hackers coming around. They're using new computer viruses. There's new techniques. So you're always learning. And to me, that was great, right? I'm never bored doing what I do. And that was something, in college, I realized was very important to do. I never wanted to be one of those people that, is making a lot of money, but is bored at their desk. I'd rather take less money and wake up excited about my job. And I think in cybersecurity, there are opportunities for that, which, you can be really excited and stoked about your work and also get paid decently as well. So kind of win-win. So one of the first things I did, and that takes up a lot of my time now, is writing free open source tools to protect Mac computers. And this kind of started in a funny way. So I'm briefly going to kind of dive through this. So I recently moved back to Hawaii, and one of my friends was a surfboard shaper, and he knew I did computer security stuff. And he said, "Hey, Patrick, my Mac computer has been hacked. I get all these pop-ups. It doesn't start up very well. Like, will you fix this?" And I said, "Sure, I can take a look." So I went to his house and I looked at his Mac. And at that time, I had just left the National Security Agency. And at the NSA, I did mostly Windows-based research. So Mac was kind of a new platform to me. And so if someone gives me a Windows computer at that time, I would know exactly what to do, where to look for malware, what tools to run to see if it's been infected, how to disinfect and clean it. But I couldn't say the same for Mac computers. And so I said, okay, well, someone has probably written a tool where you can scan a Mac and see all the programs that have been set to persist. And persist means, will be automatically launched every time the computer is rebooted. And this is something that essentially all malware does, so that when you restart your system, it will get executed again. So on Windows, there's a tool called auto runs. You run it, you see a list of all the processes that are set to automatically launch. And then you can look through that and say, okay, cool, that's Google Chrome's updater, that's fine. But wait a minute, what is this, unsigned binary that looks really strange? And that will likely be the malware. Well, it turns out there were no tools like that for macOS. And so I said, cool, let me go home, write a little Python script, read up on how programs can persist on macOS, and then pop back to his house a few days later with this really janky, crappy Python script, and ran it on his Mac, and then it crashed the first time, so I had to fix it up a little bit. But at the end, it gave me a list of the software that had been installed on his computer that was set to automatically start. And sure enough, there was some adware that had persisted itself on his computer. So I was able then to disinfect his computer, which was great. He shaped me a custom surfboard that I still have today. So I was like, wow, this is like being a nerd is paying off, right? It's like surfboard check. So I will always remember that. I was like, probably the first time in my career I felt like, cool. I was like, sweet, this is paying dividends for me. So that was awesome, but it also showed me that there was a need for these security tools for macOS. So over the last 5 or 6, 7, 8 years now, I've written a lot of these tools that, again, all free and open source, and they really run the gamut. The auto runs tool I named Knock Knock because it tells you who's there. And so you can run it on your Mac, and it'll show you all the software that is set to automatically start anytime your computer launches. And of course, there'll be a lot of legitimate software because there's a lot of legitimate reasons for software to persist. But if there's any malware on your system, it's likely going to show up in this list as well. So that's kind of neat. Another tool I wrote is a firewall. There wasn't a free open source firewall for macOS. Firewall is just something that will alert you when an application or a program attempts to access the network for the first time. And the reason this is a powerful security tool is because malware can get into your system in a myriad of ways: an email attachment, a malicious link, pirated software, or even a zero-day exploit. But it's likely then going to connect out to its command and control server for tasking. So what the firewall does is basically sits kind of on the edge and says, hey, like I can't protect you from maybe getting infected. When the malware tries to connect out, I can detect that this is a new network connection that has not been authorized, and I can alert you. So it's a very powerful security tool that can potentially uncover even new infections. And so one of the things of these tools that's been really helpful is it really helps me understand how computer viruses work, and then also how to protect users against them. And one of the big takeaways from that is that you really should, and this I think applies to any security tool, if you're writing security tools for macOS, Windows, Linux, web, really anything, it's really important to look for malicious behaviors, not for static signatures. So traditional antivirus products will scan for a sequence of bytes. And if they see that in the file, they'll say, hey, this is malicious. And this is almost how we detect biological viruses as well. We look for a sequence of DNA, RNA, et cetera, their genome, and that's how we identify. Problem is, you're not going to be able to detect new viruses or even viruses that have mutated. So what I always like to tell people is, if you're writing security tools, look for those malicious actions. And again, if you think of this in a biological term, this makes a ton of sense. Like if you wake up one day and you have a bloody nose, like you might not know what caused it, but you are probably going to be like, I should go to a doctor and figure this out, right? So even if it's some new virus or some new bacteria or something totally unrelated, we know that that's something that's not normal. That's an abnormal action, behavior that requires, well, medical assistance. So we can apply that conceptually to writing security tools. For example, if something turns on your webcam when you're not using Zoom or FaceTime or something, right? That might be malware that's trying to spy on you via your webcam. So you can write a little utility that just tracks webcam or mic usage. There's a lot of malware that will try to turn on the mic to intercept communications in the room, kind of like a hot mic kind of capability. And if you're modifying or monitoring the webcam or the mic, well, now you can detect even brand new viruses if they use those capabilities. So again, that's kind of the idea of the firewall, the auto runs program. It's look for abnormal behaviors versus known signatures. So that's kind of just a good takeaway if you're ever writing security tools. So that's one thing I do. It's really helpful. I get a lot of feedback from the community. Really kind of helps out people, and I love the program, but I love to write like programs that fight against viruses. Like that's to me way more interesting than writing a texting app or something like that. The other thing I do is, we mentioned the introduction, is organize a Mac security conference. I actually do that with Andrea. The security conference is called Objective by the Sea. I'm wearing the logo because brand awareness is very important. And the idea was to bring Mac security professionals and those interested all together. So it's a really kind of neat community-focused event. Again, we had the observation that there really wasn't a Mac security conference, which now seems crazy, but at the time, there just wasn't. Macs were becoming more popular, and actually, Andrea had the idea and said, "Patrick, you should organize a Mac security conference in Hawaii." And I was like, that is the best idea ever. Get a lot of good ideas from Andy. So thank you for that. And the idea was, well, yeah, let's do it in Hawaii. So everyone will want to come anyways, especially if their company's paying. But also let's bring together this community of, students, Mac admins, other Mac security researchers together to kind of build this community. So that's been really fun. We just finished up version 4, so the 4th iteration of the conference. And it's something that's really brought a ton of really interesting people together, and something I'm super, super passionate about. One of the other things I do is talk at conferences. And this is probably my favorite thing about my job. So there's cybersecurity conferences around the world, right? There's Objective by the Sea in Hawaii. There's Echo Party in Argentina. There's AtHack in Saudi Arabia. Really pick a country, there's going to be a cybersecurity conference there. And once you've done enough research, published blog posts, you're kind of established in the community, you start getting invited to these conferences. And even if you're just starting out, you can also submit research to that. So if you've done some neat research, these conferences are always looking for new speakers, and they will have a call for papers where you can submit your research. If you get accepted, The conference will pay for you to come visit. And also then, put you up in a lovely hotel, and you get to come up on stage and, talk about your research. I will admit this was something I was very nervous doing. Now I feel super comfortable, but it's something that, can be scary. But the benefits of it are amazing. First, you can travel the world for free. Like, how cool is that? So a little secret, I kind of like look for countries that I want to, visit. Argentina was a great example. I was like, man, Argentina is amazing. Also, I heard a ton of incredible things about Echo Party. And I said, wow, if I submit some research to them and I get accepted, I'm going to be super honored and stoked to be able to present at this world-class conference. But I'll also be able to go to Argentina and learn about the country, meet new people, make new friends. How cool is that? It's something I would have never been able to do on my own, or very difficult if not for Echo Party and that opportunity. So there's these conferences all around the world that if you are a cybersecurity professional or are doing some neat research, you can submit talks to these conferences. And one thing I found is really good is kind of start at the small conferences, like the big ones like Black Hat and maybe even Echo Party. They do attract top tier research. So it's somewhat competitive to get accepted to those conferences. So I started by speaking at a lot of smaller conferences, which gave me a lot of practice, helped me be a lot more comfortable, and then start building almost kind of a resume. I'd always post my slides online, met new people, and then kind of slowly worked up the ladder to then get accepted at these conferences. One great piece of feedback that I've gotten, and that really helps me when creating these conference talks, is to, and hopefully this is good advice if you're ever thinking about giving conference presentations, which definitely try to do if you can. It's just such an amazing thing to do, is really understand that when you give a presentation, you really want to be helping the audience learn. So I remember early on, I went to Black Hat as an attendee, and I went to see a really well-known security researcher give a presentation, and their work was incredible. The research they did was brilliant, but they basically got up on stage and kind of just talked about the end result, not how they had got there. And so I left really feeling, one, that the person was kind of on stage just kind of showing off how cool they were. And yeah, they were really cool and did some badass research. So, can't blame them too much. But I really didn't learn anything. I was like impressed, but also like, okay, like, how do I do this? So, I really thought, hey, if I give a presentation, I want to talk about how I did what I did, and also what I tried and failed. Because a lot of times people get up on stage, give this great presentation, and you're like, wow, that is amazing. But behind the scenes, there was a lot of trials, tribulations, failures, et cetera, et cetera. So I've learned that actually works really well. So, if you are giving conference talk, think about teaching the audience, give them takeaways, empower them, because they will then leave feeling super stoked about your presentation. And, also will, be very happy that they attended that. So that, again, is just kind of a great lesson, word of advice that I've picked up by giving a lot of conference talks. So I think that really kind of wraps up my journey, some of my activities that I do now. And so now I've really reached this point in my career where I am able to focus on things that interest me. So, writing code, conference talks, organizing conferences. And when you work and do the things that interest you, that's such a valuable career goal. Basically, I almost don't see it at work. I'm following my passions. The other really neat thing about it is, these things make good money. It's if you're really passionate about eating pizza, right? Like, it's going to be hard to, pay the bills if that's what you want to do. So I always tell people, try to find something you're passionate about, but also, it's good if you can align that passion with something that is going to financially compensate you with that, because that's just going to enable you to allow you to lead a more comfortable life. The other great thing about a career in cybersecurity is you're helping people. So, when I release a new tool, I released one that would detect keyloggers. I got a lot of emails back from people that said, hey, we ran this and yeah, we actually detected keyloggers on our systems. And, it turned out in some cases that, people's systems had been hacked and infected. And so when you're kind of helping people protect themselves, like, that's a really good feeling. You're going to feel stoked. And also, though, the community is going to respond really well to that. So again, a field, a career in cybersecurity or even anything related to computer stuff can have a really positive impact on the world, which is something I think we don't talk about a lot, especially in the United States. It's all about money and status. But at the end of the day, if you focus on helping the community, you're going to be just really stoked, and you're probably going to make more money in the long run as well. So that's kind of a wrap of my journey, what I do day to day, what I focus on, some lesson learned. I think we still have some time for questions. So if there's any questions about aliens and hacking the Russians, what I do, anything like that, now is the time for us to kind of dive into some of that.
I've collected a few questions that they left on the chat. So
Okay.
I'll start reading them, and then if anyone has more questions, I'm gonna ask them to put them in the chat, okay?
Perfect.
So the first question I saw is, how old are you?
That's a rude question. No, I'm just kidding. So I am 38. I am 38 years young. I've been doing cybersecurity research since probably my early 20s, I think, when I graduated college. So I do have the benefit now of doing this for a while, which definitely helps. Again, as I mentioned, when you're focusing on kind of one area, you're doing that for 10 years, you're going to get really good at it. And people are going to start recognizing you and start inviting you to come give conference talks on this topic. So, and again, one of the great things about fields and careers in computer technology, there's a lot of longevity. So, I have some friends that were like athletes, and it's like, yeah, by the time you hit 40 or 50, like, yeah, you can't be a professional athlete anymore. So like, you got to find something else to do. But I feel in technology, like you can do that until you're, I don't know, 70, 80. That's at least my plan. So kind of a perk of that.
Cool. Next question. You mentioned you're intimately related to aliens. What does that mean?
So as we can see on my hat, right, it's like aloha and then a UFO. So one of the reasons I went to work for NASA is I really wanted to figure out if there were aliens or not. So I live in Hawaii, and Hawaii, I went to school there. There's a large percentage of the population here that's very interested in aliens, perhaps more so than on the mainland. So I said, cool, like, if someone knows about aliens, it's likely going to be NASA. So went to work at NASA, and, I was doing my programming stuff, asking about aliens. And I didn't get an answer. I was like, they either don't know or they're hiding this. So I was like, you know what? You know who's going to know? The US government spy agency. I was like, the NSA or the CIA, if there's aliens, they're going to know. So I went and got a job there, and that's all I can say.
And are there?
Maybe we'll cover that in the next Academy event.
Okay, next question.
This is a recorded session. I got to be careful what I say.
I have a question. Can I?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Okay. Hi, Patrick. How are you? My question is, there are malware for macOS that when you execute, I can take over the control of the computer, or macOS will warn me that I am executing and not signal executable?
That is an excellent question, and something that I've been very involved in recently. So current versions of macOS, if a malware sample gets on your system and tries to execute, macOS should warn you if it's not signed and not notarized. Notarization is something that Apple recently added that basically says that in order for a program to run, it needs to have Apple's stamp of approval. So developers have to submit their compiled applications, their binaries, their programs to Apple. Apple scans them. If they don't find any malware, gives it this stamp of approval, this notarization status, and then it's allowed to run. This was designed specifically to thwart malicious code. So even if you're tricked into running it, the operating system will say, hey, wait a minute, this has not been approved by Apple. Two problems. Malware authors have been able to trick Apple into notarizing their code. You can think about, you create a calculator application and, 4 days in the future, it downloads a second payload and executes that. If Apple scans the application, they're not going to find that logic. They might see it download something, but you can be like, that's an update. So, it's something that Apple's never fully going to solve. Interestingly,
if I have to be a silent developer. I mean, if I publish a new software in the iTunes store, they will know that who I am because I
Exactly.
publish the software.
Yeah,
I cannot fake my identity in the store. I mean.
Yeah, and that's what people do. So in the cases where Apple has inadvertently notarized malicious code, the developer ID is fraudulently obtained. It's used, they use the fake ID.
Okay. Right.
Apple doesn't know. Apple can revoke that code signing certificate, so that will prevent the malware from running on new systems. But a lot of times it's too late. Interesting though, at Echo Party, I am giving a presentation on a really interesting bug that actually bypassed all of Apple's checks. So you could create an application in a certain way that when it was run, it would exploit a very subtle flaw in the operating system, and it would be allowed to execute even though it was unsigned or not notarized.
Okay,
so,
sounds really good. Okay.
Yeah, so it's
needs to be a 0 day, like okay.
Exactly, and now it's patched, so that's good. But we are seeing adversaries find flaws in Apple's policies. So Apple implements good ideas, but sometimes the implementation is not secure, and so they run into problems there. But good question.
Okay, this leads to the next question, which is, what do you think about Apple in terms of security?
That is a really good question. And, I've arguably built my career on the idea that Macs and Apple devices are secure, when in the reality is it's a little more nuanced. It's a little more complicated. So first we have iOS. iOS is arguably the most secure consumer device. It's something that Apple did a really good job on and is very difficult to hack. The average person does not have to worry about their iPhone getting hacked. Very interesting though, because the iPhone is basically a black box, right? You can't even run a process list. You can't see what programs are running or installed in the background, right? So what sophisticated adversaries do, nation states, APT groups, three-letter spy agencies, they will find ways to hack these devices because they have unlimited budgets and very skilled researchers and hackers. And then they will hack into, example, an iOS device. Well, the victim is kind of screwed. Like they can't see what's running on their device. So once these hackers have penetrated the device, the security of the device is actually beneficial then to the adversary. Macs, on the other hand, I can open a terminal. I can see what processes are running. I can dump memory from processes. I can really poke around and see what's going on. Also, I can write security tools that can do this. iOS, you cannot because Apple has locked it so down. So there's a very interesting inflection point where when the security of the device can actually benefit the adversaries. Again, adversaries, the top tier, three-letter agencies, nation states, those kind of things. I don't know what the answer is, because if you make the device less secure so that users can see what's running, well, hackers are going to find a way to manipulate that. But it's just something good to be aware of, that the fact that the security of a device can ultimately be used against it. I mentioned I focus predominantly on macOS, and one of the reasons for this is it is really not that secure, contrary to what Apple says. At least in the US, a lot of people think that Macs can't get viruses or can't get them that easily, and there's some truth to this. Largely, it's just because Macs weren't as popular as Windows. 5 years ago, Windows had 80–90% of the market share, and if you're a hacker developing a computer virus, you're not going to care about those 10% of Macs. You're going to create an exploit or malicious code that can target 80 or 90% of the market share, which was Windows. Now, though, we're seeing Macs becoming ever more popular, especially in the enterprise. So hackers and malware authors are noticing this and are porting their malware and their exploits to target macOS. So we see a huge uptick, adware, malware, viruses that target macOS. So macOS is, just another computer system. It's going to have vulnerabilities and flaws. So just like you can hack a Windows system, you can hack a Mac. So Apple is making great strides to introduce things like notarization to protect users. But the reality is there's still a lot of flaws, a lot of vulnerabilities. And macOS is security still has a long way to go.
I have another one here. Why free open source tools? How do you make your money?
That is a great question. I'm really glad you answered that. So one of the main reasons I initially started creating tools and made them open source was the fact that I used to work at the NSA. So you can imagine, I'm like, hey guys, here is a program you have to download. It's a security tool, so it needs to run with root privileges. So, just put in your password and wink, wink, you know, it doesn't install an NSA backdoor on it, right? Like there was a lot of trust that was going to have to be instilled. So I said, look, I'm going to open source everything. Yes, you could still maybe slip in a backdoor, but anybody could look at the source code. And so it's just way more transparent. I also believe that open source, you know, is often more secure. Other people can more easily audit it. But really at the end of the day, it's more transparent. People can see exactly what your tool is doing. Free was also just really something that aligned with my personal beliefs, and that is that end users should not have to pay for security tools. You know, I've worked on certain cases. One situation I worked with the FBI on was really interesting. An individual had been hacking people's Mac computers for over a decade, undetected, because he wrote a new computer virus that the antivirus engines, which again were looking for sequences of bytes, weren't detecting because they had never seen those bytes before. And so for over 10 years, he had hacked into people's computers and he was turning on their webcams to spy on them. You know, a lot of times females. And so it's just like really gross, nasty stuff. And, you know, this bothered me because I was like, you know, if they had been running security tools, it would have been very trivial to detect this attack. The way he wrote this virus is he would wait till the user was not at their computer and then would turn on the webcam. The malware wasn't really sophisticated, so the green indicator light would come on, but the malware author made the largely correct assumption that if you were not sitting in front of your computer, you might not notice that. So you can imagine computers in your bedroom, you're checking Facebook, you know, go to bed, and then like, you know, turns on the little camera light. That's something that should never happen. It's really easy to write a security tool that basically says like, if the webcam is in use and the user's not at the computer, like that's anomalous, malicious behavior, and like throw up an alert. So I always thought, look, if these users had been running one of my security tools, we could have detected this attack a lot sooner. Two reasons they likely weren't is one, Apple says Macs don't get viruses. That's, you know, Apple's fault, and maybe users for believing that. But two, you know, people might not be willing to pay for security software. You know, maybe it's expensive or something. So again, if it's free, it's something that you can give back to the community. So then the question comes, okay, great, your free open source tools, like that takes a lot of time and effort. How do you get paid? Right? It's really nice to be financially compensated for what you're doing. Two ways. First, by releasing free open source tools, you become well-known in the community, which means you will get invited to the cybersecurity conference to give talks. So in that case, you know, there might not be a dollar amount, but, you know, you might be able to travel the world on someone else's dime. So again, it's a great way to really kind of build a name for yourself and some career recognition, which then will have other benefits that, you know, are tangentially related, but, you know, can have some financial benefit as well. The really cool thing I do is I use a website named Patreon. Patreon is a website where people who are stoked on what you're doing can support you with some nominal amount. So here's an example. Someone downloads my firewall and installs it. And during the install, it says, hey, thank you. If you'd like to support this, click yes. The other competing firewall products are, you know, $30, $40, $50. Mine is free. So user might be like, cool, this is awesome. I will give Patrick $1 a month. And so Patreon supports this like monthly contribution. I don't want to call it a subscription, but people basically sign up and commit to some amount. And so the user might say, hey, this is a great piece of software. I love what Patrick's doing. I'm going to give him $1. Well, that starts to add up when people start downloading your tool. And again, since it's free and open source and the competition costs $50, like your tool is going to become pretty popular. And yeah, 80% of people who download it aren't going to pay, but there's some percentage that are like, hey, I really like what you're doing. So via Patreon, I've actually been able to, you know, kind of build this, these user base who are supporting what I'm doing. And they're really just stoked on that. And it's really gotten to the point where the amount of money that it brings in was complementary to, you know, my full-time day job. So, you know, one of the reasons I'm able to be kind of an independent security researcher is thanks to these free open source tools. So I'm a big fan of the community. And when you kind of give back and do the right thing, I've always found that invariably, you know, that comes back to you, karma, but also in, you know, a financial upside. So I'm very appreciative to community that supports what I do. But I think because initially I went free open source, it really helped the popularity of my tools grow, helped me make a name for myself, and then helped kind of this community feedback. And it's cool. And there's also individuals. For example, one of the founders of WhatsApp is one of my main Patreon contributors. He was like, hey, Patrick, I love what you're doing. I sold WhatsApp for $1 gazillion. So, I have some extra money. I just want to support, what you're doing for the community. I'm like, awesome. This is really cool. So it's really this win-win situation that I'm really grateful for. And again, goes back to really kind of putting the community first and foremost, and kind of maybe trusting in the universe and kind of getting some karmic feedback in the long run.
I have a couple more questions here. This one says, is there any book you recommend to understand macOS? Is The Art of Mac Malware your book will help on that?
That is a great question. And I like that question because if you're going to study computer viruses and malware on any operating system, it really benefits you to also understand the operating system internals. One example, we talked about persistence. How does software install itself on macOS so that it'll be automatically restarted when the computer reboots or the user logs in? Well, you're going to learn about that if you read about macOS internals and how Apple provides mechanisms for that then malware can abuse. So my favorite macOS books are the books written by Jonathan Levin. They're called Star iOS Internals because they're iOS, macOS, et cetera, et cetera. And those really dig deeply into the internals of macOS. They're a heavy read, but they're indispensable. You can also learn a lot online if you Google specific topics, so you can get a lot of free information as well. Yes, The Art of Mac Malware is my book. Again, I wanted a community resource that could be free. So again, this is kind of aligns with my free open source mentality. Is I wrote this book and anyone could comment and provide feedback on it while I was writing it. So this was great because people would point out grammar corrections and technical issues with this. So I kind of crowdsourced out the editing process. My plan was always to make it free open source. Again, we need more Mac security researchers. The hackers, the malware authors are proliferating. We need to counter that. So I think that information should be free. So I wrote this free open source book. It's fully free online, no strings attached. You don't have to sign up for emails. You just go to the website, all the content is there. I was then approached by a publisher that said, hey, Patrick, we love this book. We want to pay you and publish that. And I was like, this is awesome. I said, but one thing, we have to keep it online for free. They said, no problem. There is a large percentage decent percentage of people who still like, a hardcover book. There's companies that provide book budgets, so people will buy the copy. But yes, totally cool if the content is also available for free online. So what I'm doing is I'm working with them. They're professionally editing it, professionally laying it out, and then all the chapters will be still available online for free. So that to me, again, is just another example of, hey, let's just kind of put this out to the universe, make it free for the community. Everyone's going to be stoked on it because it's free content, it has valuable information. They can be involved by providing feedback and comments. So it becomes very popular. And then in this case, a publisher took notice and said, yeah, cool, let's publish it. We'll professionally edit and, give you a percentage of all the sales. So I was like, wow, this never was the plan, but like that is a win-win scenario. So the two books I mentioned, kind of the Star OS internal books by Jonathan Levin are great resources. The Art of Mac Malware, Volume 1 is on analysis, is a really good read if you're interested in Mac malware, exploits, infection vectors, persistence capabilities, and is also free.
Okay, last two questions. Are you interested in security in Ethereum, for example?
In what?
Like, are you up to date on blockchain? And
okay.
Are you interested in Ethereum, for example?
Yeah, that's an interesting question too, because cryptocurrencies are kind of this relatively new technology that has the potential to really impact many aspects of our lives. Also, there's perhaps ways to make money. Bitcoin prices are pretty high, coming from essentially zero. But this is again an example where it's kind of interesting to me, but if I started diving into that, this would take away from, writing another book on Mac malware or releasing a new tool. And, I'm not saying I forced myself not to do that, but I've really kind of committed to, hey, I'm going to just do Mac security. I'm going to be the Mac security person. I'm going to dig on that. And, also at this point, I have a lot of knowledge and understanding in that field, whereas getting into cryptocurrency, Ethereum, smart contracts, like, I would be like the bottom of the barrel, which isn't necessarily a bad place to be. And I could definitely learn a lot, but it's not something I feel super passionate about. Whereas the Mac stuff, I'm super interested in. And so I just really spend all my time and energy there. That having been said, I think it's a really interesting place to look into. I mean, cryptocurrency might be, kind of what Mac security was 10 years ago, where there's not a ton of people there, especially looking at it from a security point of view. And it's something that could take off. So if you get involved now, a few years down the road, when it becomes even more popular and there's a high demand for security professionals auditing smart contracts, et cetera, hey, you're there, you're ready.
Let's go with the last question. How is Echo Party and Argentinian hackers seen in the US? And what do you think about the project of Academy?
That's a great question to end on. So I'm going to say that in the hacker community in the US, Argentinian hackers are looked at incredibly highly. They're very, very respected. I think there's individual Argentinian hackers that are really well known. Cesar is one researcher who's been doing tons of work. But I think that American researchers and hackers know that the Argentinian mindset applies really well to hacking things. And I might be wrong about this, but I found Argentinians to be very creative. Sometimes they will, skirt the rules, try to figure out how to, maybe beat the system or, play the system a little bit, which are great things to do and scale really well to cybersecurity and hacking, which is, exactly that same mentality. It's like, how do we break in? How do we creatively approach this problem in a new way that wasn't intended? So I think that the culture of Argentina actually really creates a ton of very creative and intelligent hackers that myself and other researchers and hackers and cybersecurity professionals in the US realize. I have friends that work with various cybersecurity companies that are based in the US that hire a ton of Argentinians, largely because, again, they're very motivated and very creative. So I think the mindset of that is really well. In terms of Echo Party, again, one of the main reasons I wanted to speak at that, it was one of the top conferences in my mindset in terms of the people that presented there. It was kind of like, it's like you have Black Hat, DEF CON, Echo Party, kind of all up there. If you could talk at those, it's kind of like a badge you could wear, being like, yeah, I give a presentation at Echo Party. So I think, again, it has really good rapport. It's really well respected, which is cool. Like, I had an amazing time. I've spoken at Echo Party many times afterwards, or many times, again, because I love the country, love visiting, but also, every time I get on stage at Echo Party, I was like, wow, I feel like, I was like, this is the top. This is really, really cool. So it's really cool. In terms of Academy, I think it's an amazing program. I love the idea of, bringing students together and, exposing them to different ideas, bringing in different speakers. And so, again, I feel super honored to be able to talk to you about my journey. One of the things I look back on, I was like, wow, I wish there was something like Academy when I was starting out, because many times I felt very lost. I, knew I didn't want to be like a database developer. I was like, I knew how to program, but I was like, oh, what else can I do with these skills? And so being exposed to different options would have been really helpful for me. I mean, I kind of eventually fell into a really good path. And for that, I feel super blessed, super fortunate. But I really would have liked, having peers working together with me, talking to experts in the field and really providing guidance and feedback. Again, when I was, kind of at that younger age, figuring out what I wanted to do. I think that would have really been helpful to me. And I like to think I would be further ahead in my career now if I had that opportunity at the time. So again, when Andrea invited me to speak at Echo Party, yes, and also Academy, something I really thought would be really neat, just something for me to share. And hopefully you find it inspiring and there's some grains of interest there, and maybe help you on your cybersecurity or whatever career you choose.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. We have a lot of more questions, but we ran out of time. So
Okay.
thank you so much for connecting. You can go back to surfing again. Thank you
That's
so
why
much.
I
And I
was
It's pretty
think
early, though.
Yeah, thank you.
interrupt his surfing.
No, this is I need the interruptions. There were some Argentinians out surfing today with the Brazilians, so.
I'm
That's
just
but
gonna
I-
read a couple of the comments. People is saying, we love you. We'll see you again in Echo. Thank you. You left us thinking a lot. Thank you for coming to Academy. So that's it. Thank you so much.
You rocked, Patrick. Thank you.
Thank you. And everyone, I'm on Twitter at Patrick Wardle. My DMs are open. So if you have questions, about this specific talk or Mac security, feel free to reach out. Like I said, I really like to talk to people who are interested in this, provide feedback. So, shoot me a DM anytime. If it's in Spanish, I can probably understand it. I might ask Andy. So don't worry about the language barrier as well. But again, thank you so much for having me. Thank you to Andrea and Fede. Thank you for organizing Academy. And yes, I will, I'm speaking virtually at Echo Party this year, but next year I will be back in person, fingers crossed. So I would love to drink some Fernet and mate with you all.
Amazing.
Eso.
Thank you so much.
Dos
See you
cosas
next
que
time.
odio.
Gracias, Patricio.
Thank you, Patrick.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.